Hi, welcome to Get Used to It. I'm Sheila Kuehl, and as always, I will guide you effortlessly through the hour of this show. Those of you who have seen the show before know that on occasion, we do one in a series of what we call Voices of Our Lives, in which we'll talk to one person who has made a significant difference, impact, and contribution in the LGBT community. And today is one of those shows because it's my great pleasure to have as my guest Roland Palencia, who's the new executive director of Equality California. And for those of you in other states, Equality California is California's organization for lobbying and advocacy on LGBT issues in Sacramento and frankly across the state. So welcome, Roland.
Well, thank you.
Congratulations and condolences. It's a big job.
It's going to be exciting.
Yeah. Well, I'm really happy to have you on the show.
Thank
and
you, Sheila.
I think our audience would really love to know kind of more about you. We know
Sure.
what you're doing this minute, but do you mind if we
Yeah,
sort of go all
absolutely.
the way back?
Yeah.
Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
Well, I was born and raised in Guatemala, Central America. And I was born on the Caribbean side of Guatemala, between Belize and Honduras. So it's a very Afro-Latin kind of environment. And Guatemala happens to be a small country, probably the size of Tennessee, 14 million people, 28 languages, mostly Mayan-based.
Wow.
But where I was born, there was a language that was called Garifuna. And Garifuna was a mixture of Western African languages with Spanish and some British English kind of thing. So I was raised among just listening to different sounds, different ethnicities, different people. So it was always kind of like a natural thing for me to be among people from just different backgrounds. And the United Fruit Company was really big in the place where I was born. It was a port. It's the largest port in Guatemala. So there were a lot of Americans who also went to my school. It was a Catholic school, which is the school where generally the children of business people and people who were in the United Fruit Company will go. So I was very, very exposed to a lot of ethnicities, a lot of languages, and just be that as part of the oxygen that I breathe, so to speak.
And what did your parents do?
My dad and my mom, they had a small business. It was a bakery. We had 25 employees. So it was a mid-sized business, and it was a little economic engine in our hometown. So we kind of like help out in the business. And as you might know, children who are born in businesses, there's a different mentality. You become very entrepreneurial. You kind of become self-sufficient, but you also understand that you have to be all about customer service, that you really depend on other people buying your product. And that really gave me some key concepts in terms of how I got involved in the movement and how I have served the movement. In terms of just being able to be of service and be able to also see many nonprofit organizations as really a business with a social consciousness.
Right, with customer oriented.
Customer oriented, absolutely.
Right. So how did you come to live in California?
Well, my father was a businessman, a small businessman, but he was also a man with a social consciousness. He was very political. He eventually joined the underground movement in Guatemala to overthrow the military dictatorship that Guatemalans had been living for many decades.
That must have been very dangerous for you guys
It
too.
was extremely dangerous. It was basically he had to hide. We barely saw him, and he was gone most of the time. And when he will come in, it will be in the evening for a few hours. We'll say hello, and he'll just go back out to whatever he was going. So it really made my mom very concerned in terms of our safety, her safety. So she decided to come to the U.S. in the early 70s. So she left, and she wasn't planning to stay here, but she realized that there were a lot of freedoms here in the U.S., especially as a woman, as a Latina woman. All of a sudden, she was able to find her own job, create her own network, and some of the people that she met was actually a gay couple. One was a Jewish man, and the other one was a Mexican American man.
Hmm.
And they loved my mom, and they basically became her confidants and her support system, part of her support system. They eventually became our immigration sponsors. So from the get-go, my story is a gay story.
Well, about your own sexuality, though, did you? How old were you when you moved to California?
I was almost 18 when I
So,
came to the US.
did you know you were gay when you were in
I
Guatemala?
I knew I didn't have the term or the concept or the idea what gay was, but I knew I was very different since I was 5. Like most of us, we really know really early in terms of our sexuality. I knew I liked to play with girls when I was supposed to be playing with boys, and that changed later on, of course. But I had an extensive network of female cousins that I play with, and it just felt so right. And I was not really too enthused about being in team sports like soccer or basketball or anything along those lines. So I think that is kind of like the trajectory of many of us.
And were you in any kind of activism in
No,
Guatemala?
no. I was a very quiet, well-behaved. I was probably one of the best. My mom tells that one of the best children you can ever have. I was heavily responsible. One of the things that happened is, as my dad went and joined the revolution, so to speak, and my mom came to the U.S., so we stayed there. We stayed there for like 4.5 years.
So your mom came to the U.S., but you stayed in Guatemala?
Exactly. All of us stayed. All the 5 children. My older brother and I'm the second oldest. But my brother went to a Salesian boarding school. I eventually kind of like joined him later on. But I basically was the parent at the age of 14 when they left. I stayed there and I was basically the parent. We stayed with family members, but I was the one who was taking care of my younger siblings. So it really also showed me a lot about protecting families, a lot about the responsibility of even raising your own family and how providing a safe space, which is so resonates with what, the kind of work that we're doing now.
Right.
Yeah.
So what was it like for you? Suddenly you came to the U.S. to join your mother?
Correct.
And it must have been quite a transition.
Yeah, by that time, my father had been killed and disappeared. So he was killed in 71. We came here in the mid-70s. We were still there when that happened. It was traumatizing. It was traumatizing to my mom because she was here in the U.S., certainly to us. And she really felt really strongly that we needed to come to the U.S. as soon as possible.
And so you were on a plane, a boat, a car, a bus. Must have been quite a trip.
Yeah, we actually took a bus because my mom didn't have a lot of money. So we had to
up through Mexico.
Yeah, and that took days. That took days to get here, and that was quite a trip. And it was the first time that we were actually outside of Guatemala, and it was quite a journey. And all we knew is that we wanted to join our mother because our father was no longer around.
So was she in LA?
She was in LA. She's only been in LA. Yeah, it's the only city she's ever. Yeah.
And so did you continue education in?
Yeah. So
California?
I came here and did a couple of years in high school, and then I went to UCLA. One of the good things about a Catholic education is you really get the basics of math and grammar and language and just good education. I mean, I went to all through most of my primary and secondary school in Guatemala. I went to Catholic schools. I went to a Salesian boarding school, and that was very interesting because you were pretty much kind of like in a monastery kind of thing, and the food was horrible. That's all I remember.
Yeah, I guess it's only good in the monasteries where they grow their own food.
Exactly.
And,
no, they
whatever.
didn't. No, it was in a dry climate. They couldn't grow. They couldn't grow anything.
So at UCLA, were you drawn to activism? What years
so
were you there?
So I was there. I graduated in 1982, and I started to come out as a gay man like in 1980, 81. I was already dating men, going out and doing the disco thing, and it was the rage at that time. So I wanted to. So one of the things that happens with a lot of immigrants, especially if you come from a kind of a middle class family, you feel the contrast, like the shock of how you're treated in your native land and how you're treated here. And just the conversation around immigrants and what that means. And all of a sudden it kind of involves you, even if you're not personally part of the conversation, it involves you.
Right.
And so for me, it was such a dissonance between how we were raised and what the concept of being an immigrant in the US was all about. So I wanted to do something about that. I wanted to change the conversation because I knew that, first of all, this nation, for the most part, except for Native Americans, is a nation founded by immigrants. Those are our roots. You know, we're just a few generations away from people being from another country for the vast majority of Americans. So I wanted to change the conversation about immigrants from Latin America. So I joined a Chicano group called MECHA, Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de sus Lands, which you know quite well because
I knew.
You were one of the troublemakers at that time.
Early on, when MECHA was formed, there were no Chicano or Latin American deans in my office.
Wow.
So I got to be their advisor. The same with the Black Student Union. I mean,
So you know the history.
It was sort of like, whoa. Well, it was a great education for me on social justice and what was going on. But MECHA was pretty well established by that time.
Absolutely. And so one of the and for me, it wasn't even about the Chicano or even the radical politics or anything, even though that was part of it. But it was more having a space where I could be a Latino here in the U.S. A year or so later, I wanted to be the co-chair of the organization. And by that time, people knew that I was gay. And a couple of people approached me who were running against me or they wanted somebody else to run. And they basically said, if you run, we're going to tell everyone that you're gay. And my definition of gayness at that time was like very internalized homophobia. We're like bad people. Even though it was so contrary to what I felt deep inside, I still had these mental constructs and even emotional constructs of a homophobic kind of idea what a gay person was. And I just did not want to have anything to do with it. And I just quit. And then
quit MECHA and didn't run for co-chair.
I did not run for co-chair. And so what I did is I started to really look deep inside and said, no, I had to fight back. This is not right. And I just felt that it was such an inconsistency to talk about freedom and justice and yet who I was not part of that equation. So I went to the Gay and Lesbian Center. It was right on Highland at that time. I think Steve Schulte was the executive director there. And there was a support group for gay Latino men. And I joined the group. And I wanted it to become an organization. So a whole bunch of us got together and we turned the support group into an organization. And we call it Gay Latinos Unidos, and then eventually Gay and Lesbian Latinos Unidos. What was really significant about that is that was the time, we're talking about the early 80s, when lesbians and gay men were not necessarily working together. And we really wanted to break through all kinds of oppressions. And so we created Gay and Lesbian Latinos Unidos, and it was very popular. We didn't have all the competition that people have now, like Facebook and videos and all that kind of stuff. It was just incredibly popular. And the center was really instrumental in creating this space. And so that was my first kind of...
Well, even the Gay and Lesbian Center itself,
correct.
Their sign used to say the Gay Social Services Center.
Exactly.
Or Community Services Center. And one day some lesbian spray painted, the carrot.
Exactly.
And lesbian.
Yeah, correct.
So it was the Gay and Lesbian Community Services Center.
So that was one thing that we immediately did. And I eventually got a job with the Gay and Lesbian Center. My job was to help LGBT youth, especially transgenders, to get employment, because the unemployment rate among transgenders was and still is very high. And it was a very, very difficult job. But I think that it really taught me so much about the pain, the challenges, but also the potential that our community, our people have. And it really turned
When you
me
say it was difficult, do you mean it was difficult to find
to find
employers to
employers.
understand, or difficult for you personally as well?
No, I think no, the employers. I mean, just there was so most of the employers were gay businesses, but there were small businesses, and many of the employment was temporary. So it was a very unstable situation. But we used to have some government funds to help us with that, and of course, when Ronald Reagan, well, a few years after he came in, he decided to get rid of that, and I think that was. To me, that was a way, because we also helped to develop leadership by doing some of this. And I think it was really, they saw the writing on the wall that these nonprofits were really creating like a cadre of potential leaders and activists that might not necessarily be in tune with their agenda.
That government funding, that early funding, CETA funding.
Correct. Comprehensive
we call
employment.
Mamacita funding, is what we call it. So many people that I speak to in our community got their sort of their first jobs on a CETA grant. But you know, when a person deciding to sort of spend their lives in social service, public service, it's not a usual thing, especially coming from a business family, an entrepreneurial family. Although, as you said, you know, your father was a revolutionary. What do you think it was, even just at this point, in yourself? You come to the United States, a couple of years of high school to make up, and you know, UCLA. But what you want to do is somehow in the social services center. I mean, why was that?
I just can't. I can do quite well on my own. With the education that I had, the networks that I built, I just want other people to have a bit of what I have. I also don't necessarily see. I don't know. I just think that we can have a much better world when all the limitations that keep individuals and communities from living their highest potential can be removed. I think that we can really find a lot of solutions to a lot of the problems that we're having, and just faith in people. I really have. I'm an, how to say it, relentless optimist. You know, no matter what happens, I'm always like get up and go back. But I think also social justice people come from all walks of life. But I think I remember when I was a kid and how marginalized I felt, and how I remember that because Guatemala is it's almost like there's a caste society in some ways. In the sense that there's a hierarchy, economic, ethnic, and so forth. And we used to have help in terms of, you know, like maids or what have you. But and those women were treated so incredibly badly. And I remember as a kid, I will defend them. I will say that's not right. And I was accused of dating, you know, half of them, because that's why I was defending them, and you know, and you know, exactly. And but I remember that as an early child, and I think it had to do with how we're marginalized, and we connect to that pain in other people, and we connect to also their potential, or who they could become if those societal restrictions were not there.
Must have been difficult, though, even at the center, because you said the center was supportive, but it was a very divided time. And I think a lot of our white brothers and sisters, it didn't even occur to us that there was this division, or that there was, you know, people were going through the AIDS crisis, and they thought they were just taking, you know, leadership. But it must have been, I don't know, it must have felt a little separate. Well, I think it was important to establish.
Well, equality is not spread equally.
Right.
We know that. And I think that one of the things that I hope I can contribute is transform that conversation, that we don't need to duplicate the hierarchies that exist outside of our community, that we could be a lot more innovative, a lot more queer about it, a lot more different about it, and that we could actually create a blueprint and even a model for the rest of society to follow. We happen to be in a very privileged position we are the most diverse civil rights movement in the history of this nation.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it.
Mm-hmm.
We speak every language. There is no other group like that. We have every sexuality and a variation thereof that you can think of.
Right.
Gender identity, gender, regionally. We come from everywhere, work everywhere, just about every age. I mean, kids are coming out at the age of 10, 11, and some of us even new at the age of 5. And they already have the language. They already have the work that you and I have done.
Right.
They have inherited that, and they have elevated the conversation of being queer and LGBT to a much higher level than when you and I were being.
Absolutely. Well, that's what the work was for.
Exactly. So I think that we're a microcosm, and we have this amazing embarrassment of riches that our diversity reaches wide and deep.
But I think you also saw that there was a need to be welcoming.
Correct.
And so at Gay and Lesbian Latinos Unidos.
Correct.
And then there were other organizations that I think you.
Well, I was the chief of operations and vice president at AIDS Healthcare Foundation, and what moved me there was that I wanted. I mean, all kinds of people were being impacted. As a matter of fact, at that time, mostly was white gay men. The minority epidemic was not as in full force in the early 80s. And I created an organization called Viva, which means long live, that basically was a gay and lesbian Latino arts organization, so we could keep the memory of the artists alive. And we did. We collected a lot of things, and we actually have a booklet that collects their poems and
artists who passed away of AIDS.
Who passed away that we knew that were going to.
Right.
And eventually joined AIDS Healthcare Foundation, and that work obviously was for all communities, especially those communities who could not afford to pay for their own medicines, or who didn't have access to healthcare and so forth. And that was communities of all ethnicity. And I think that's, for me, I'm very proud to be a gay man, a Latino man, an immigrant. And I want to use my experience, but also transcend, I shouldn't say transcend, but just connect that experience. Mm-hmm. And I think if we do that, connect that humanity to other people's humanities. And I always, and like I said, probably because of where I was born in a very multicultural environment in the Caribbean, and it just, I kind of operate from that standpoint.
You bring an enormous amount of life experience, to your new job, but also I think all as you went along. But it is an interesting sort of convergence. Correct. Because we, for many decades, have been more racially divided than we are now. Although it's still in society as a whole, a lot of divisions, a lot of it's geographic, where we live and where we grow up, and that kind. Nobody says you have to live there, but affinity. And in our community, it was there was a struggle, I think,
still,
like there was between the men and the women. Still a bit of a struggle, although I see it beginning to sort of come together as people care less about race, as there's more blending. But also I think the issue of coming out was always important. It was like the Latino community, I think you would tell me from your experience, needed to know how many of us were gay and lesbian.
Correct.
And that was hard, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I think that the disappointment of many people, LGBT people of color, was that we were raised in families that sometimes were supported, sometimes they were not. And we have this incredible ability to create extended families. And as we kind of probably could not rely too much on our biological families, we wanted to be accepted by the gay family. And that didn't quite happen in the way that we envisioned it, because we share a common oppression and so forth. So I think that was the dissonance, that was the contrast that disappointed, and that's why you had to have a lot of ethnic organizations so we could create our own empowerment. I think that my appointment is kind of timely in that sense, that we can have it all, that we can have our own, if you want to call it identities, our own sense of uh, being with who we are completely, but also use those experiences to connect to other people rather than to disconnect from other people.
Well, sometimes the experience of being marginalized,
Correct.
whether it's on the basis of race or sexual orientation, it's a strengthening thing in a way, because you become such a fighter. I mean, that's what I've seen from you as you've gone through the various areas that you've kind of lit up as you've gone, you know.
Yeah, you had to have that space because those spaces do not exist. That's why women-only spaces were so critical and still are. The question is that the only space where we can make our contribution? The answer is yes, and more.
Right.
Because those spaces still need to exist. We still need the Gay and Lesbian Center. We still need organizations like Equality California. The key is, are we going to connect our movement to other movements so we can see the commonalities rather than each one of us fighting separately for our own?
Well, let's talk about the future in a minute, but let me sort of finish with the past, because here you are at AIDS Healthcare Foundation. But it wasn't the last thing you did before this job. What happened next?
So I went and I was the executive director of a community clinic in Pico Union, which primarily serve Central American immigrants or Mexican immigrants.
And this was not related to the LGBT movement, right? So you were thinking, here's another part of my identity.
Exactly.
I need to do
I
this
never
too.
work in the Central American community. And for me, it was almost like kind of like finishing my father's revolution. You know, it was a way to honor his struggle in Central America, and that I wanted to do something, for that community. And it was an amazing experience because I got to be an openly gay man in a primarily Latino environment, and that work, especially now as we want, people to be on our side, so to speak. I was able to transform and change a lot of people's perceptions as to who we are by my leadership, because we went from like 1.5 million to almost like 7 million. Went from serving 10,000 visits to 40,000 visits. I got some real estate. Some was an outright gift. Another one I purchased. And it really showed people what we as queer leaders can do. That we and also were able to hire more openly LGBT people. And this was in Pico Union. This was right in the middle of Pico Union. And certainly I think that the leadership of the Central American community and also connecting with the Chicano establishment, so to speak, the clinic. It was quite a metaphor for where the Central American community was at that time. And this is 1999. It was in a basement. It was, I used to call it the catacombs because it was in a basement, no windows. And I said, no, we need to come out.
Out of the basement.
Out of the basement, onto the streets, to the streets. And we need to come out. And I think that is such a strong concept for us in terms of visibility and coming out and claiming our dignity. And it's no accident that a lot of the DREAM Act, the student movement, the undocumented students who are university students, that a lot of that leadership is queer, is LGBT youth, because they understand coming out as a queer, as a gay person, LGBT person, but also like coming out as an undocumented immigrant. And they have so blended the concepts and the leadership in a way that is just unbelievably courageous.
Well, we found that actually more and more, I think, among young people who are taking leadership in so many of the different community activities and a lot in community organizing. Not just political, but some in political, and more now. I think since Obama was elected, and young people went, oh, government can do things. Maybe we should think about government too.
Exactly.
They're so wonderful. But one of the things I think about being an immigrant or being, I mean, unless you're afraid your family's going to be hauled off, in which case you want to feel that you should be silent. But so many outliers, like immigrants, like people of color, like people in the gay and lesbian community. it's kind of like, what can they do to me that hasn't already been done?
Correct.
You know, of course I'm going to
Fight back.
be a little more, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, fight
full
back.
of fight. Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that is, it is about connecting those fights. I think that we have to send a strong message that the divide and conquer age is done and over with, that we're gonna unite and conquer.
Good.
And yeah.
So what came after the clinic?
So what came out after the clinic, I went to the California Endowment as a senior program officer. So I was basically in charge of 5 counties in Southern California. And that was Santa Barbara, Ventura, LA County, Riverside, and San Bernardino.
We should probably explain a little what the California
So the California Endowment is a foundation that was created by Blue Cross. Make a long story, in California, if nonprofit business wants to turn into a for-profit business, they have to give some of the tax breaks back to the community, and instead of to private investors. You know, what a novel idea, giving taxpayers.
Reminds me of those movies where you divide your evil half from your good half. So the health insurance company says, now we want to be for profit, so we'll give money over here, and these foundations will do the good.
Exactly.
We did. They're called conversion foundations.
Conversion foundations.
Right.
What was interesting about that fight is that they just wanted to give, like $1 billion or something like that. Making a long story short, because of advocate attorneys that we have who are just amazing in terms of the public interest, it ended up being like a $4 billion endowment, and so I was one of the people basically providing funding for advocacy and services and all that kind of stuff. So which allowed me to prioritize certain communities, and also just to see how money works on the other side. What does it feel like to give money? And that's what I did. I went to LA Care Health Plan, and I was the community benefits director there, and that's pretty much what I did. But so here we are.
So you were attracted sort of to the health field.
Correct.
That's interesting, because it's a growing recognition by grassroots organizers who have been thinking in different ways, mostly about discrimination.
Correct.
I find as a sort of an understanding that health is a big issue, no matter what the community is. I mean, it's like the thing that threads us together.
Correct. Well, a lot of things connects us. I think that we create these unnecessary disconnects that we're going to have to deconstruct and put it back together. Look at marriage equality, for instance. That touches on access to healthcare. Chances are, if you're married, that you can actually get healthcare insurance through your spouse. If you don't have that right, it really has not only an implication to your health, but also it's an economic justice issue, because most of the bankruptcies nowadays are related to health. Right. So I think that we need to look at these issues a little bit like holographic, that they're embedded with a number of issues, and start kind of like connecting them to other movements, to other issues, to other populations, instead of just seeing them as one thing, but reinforcing, just the total integrity of what that issue is. Like in civil, like marriage equality, civil marriage, there's so many embedded issues there that would allow us to connect to other communities and still keep the integrity of why we're fighting for that.
Right, but it also means that we have to develop who we are too, because it's kind of like, I'm not everything. I'm kind of who I am, and I need to fully understand that.
Correct.
Because there were so many really vibrant Latino organizations in our community. I think Bienestar, who I think you were.
Well, Bienestar came out of Gay and Lesbian Latinos Unidos. Oscar de la O was one of the presidents of Gay and Lesbian Latinos Unidos, and that was one of the contributions that organization made, that it really developed the leadership for many people like Oscar, like Laura Esquivel, and so forth.
And I think were you, after the endowment, did you go somewhere else?
LA Care Health Plan.
The LA Care Health Plan,
But one of the things that I think is important is, in the past, we're everywhere. right? I mean, we're from everywhere and we're everywhere. We were in the United Farm Workers movement. We were in the feminist movement. We were in the healthcare movement. I mean, you name it, we were there. We were kind of closeted.
Mm.
What is so different now is that we're going to go back and unite and connect these movements, but we're going to do it openly.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a real distinction, kind of like, what you were saying, as far as we also need to know who we are and
Right.
what kind of leadership we're going to bring to the table.
Right.
And I think that we are not going to be, we're going to be subservient to XYZ issue or whatever. No, we're not a diversion to the movement. We're actually a strength to the movement. We actually represent all these movements. You can have like a ready-made population that is connected to so many things, so many issues. I mean, even almost like you can even say it internationally. I mean,
right.
we are a microcosm of the world. So I think that we're coming back to those movements and connect to those movements, but with that experience that we were able to get by having those safe spaces when they were not.
So tell us a little about Equality California these days.
So
What drew you to it? What you see
yeah,
there in terms of its strengths?
well, it's gonna be a very fascinating journey.
And a lot of work, Roland.
It is a lot of people ask me, why do you want to do this to yourself? Because it's hard, it's tough, but so many people, many more people encouraged me to do this, and certainly I wanted to do it. I think that we have a real possibility of creating a very, very strong civil rights movement that can, help to transform the conversation of who we are as LGBT people, going from being a marginalized minority to being a community contribution. And I really feel that I have that passion to do that, somewhat the patience. Certainly, there's a lot in my personal story and history, but also in my professional endeavors in terms of running multi-million-dollar organizations and the networks that I have. So I think is and I want also, I think is I just love the idea of connecting movements, including within our own communities, because we're not a connected movement.
Right.
We're not as intersected as we need
Well,
to
it's
be.
interesting to me because there's been a discussion over the past decade about what people called identity politics, and how the question really was, is this still the best way to do it?
Yeah.
Because in the 14 years that I was in Sacramento, almost everyone who came to talk to me were either in the labor movement, because of course I'm a Democrat, or in an issue movement, or sometimes, as we used to say, in a disease movement, a particular kind of,
asthma,
that's
whatever.
my disease, and that's my disease, and that's my disease. And there were not the strongest sets of advocacy by identity politics kind of groups, except for Equality California, because we were, fighting, and for the DREAM Act for immigrants, we had some identity politics around that, but not strong, always the strongest organizations. So how do you see Equality California? I mean, everybody's talking marriage, but is there, and it's gotten to the governor twice, but or maybe just once, but Schwarzenegger.
Well,
wasn't
his
gonna go
own
for it,
marriage
but
is
he's gone.
And his marriage is gone too.
And his marriage is gone too, right? Oh, listen, I don't even feel good about that, even though I always felt sorry for Maria. What can I say? But do you see that this is still a good approach for us to say, we are an LGBT movement, and we're the last ones on the bus for marriage. This is what we need. And maybe some other things?
No, I think that marriage is definitely a defining issue for us at this moment. But like I mentioned before, there's so many embedded issues in that in that civil right. Certainly immigration. There are, I don't know, 35, 40,000 couples in the same sex couples in the U.S. who cannot get their, can be legalized because they can't get married to their same gender, partner. So the issue of health insurance, economic justice, all the benefits, the economic benefits that come from that,
Right.
and just dignity, to know that we have the same rights like everybody else, So, but it has a lot of components to that. There are also, issues of our youth. That in itself has a lot of embedded issues in that. So I think that we need to start looking at this, with this population or this specific issue, in a way that the tentacles, or I don't want to call them that, but just what they relate to is bigger than just the way we have probably been framing them. And I think that will take care of. I am not totally against identity politics. I think that it's been very helpful for us to do that, because even though we call it identity politics, it was really a safe space to be who we could not be outside of that community. But like everything else, it has its own limitations. And I would like to, for me, I want to redefine it. That is that identity, that ability to have created a safe space that allows me to connect to somebody else who also did that for themselves, and that we find that commonality. So it's not a limiting thing, but it's an expansive thing.
Well, I think that's true. And I also found it a kind of an interpreter job in a way, because since I was the first open gay or lesbian person elected to the legislature, I had a translation issue sort of with them, because
you were the
even
ambassador.
Supportive ones,
Yeah, you were the ambassador.
I was in their world, I was of their world,
Correct.
And yet I was a person who had a different sexuality from them. And then in my communities, where they had never been at the table, it was also important to remain connected.
Correct.
And
Absolutely.
Understanding
Correct.
of that. And people who were saying, all I care about in the whole universe is that I don't get beat up at school.
Correct.
And I'm sorry, I know there's a lot of other stuff going on, but that's
absolutely
terrifying for me every day. So if I would bring, a bill about protecting kids at school from being beat up, I would also be talking to the community about a slightly larger set of issues that other people had, like immigration issues, etc. And I think you're perfectly poised to be that kind of interpreter, really.
Yeah, and we're queer. We can multitask. We can really have, because when you think about it, it's just really exploring all our identities, right?
Right.
I'm entering my mid-50s. That's a whole different population. I'm an immigrant. That's a different identity. I live in Los Feliz. That's a totally different. I have an extended family in my LGBT world. That's a different identity. It goes on and on. I just think it's exploring all those identities and how do we use that to connect to a larger world. And that's a big world when you really think about all the identities that we have and how we use that to connect, to a network world that also kind of thinks about itself in that way.
Mentioning extended families reminded me there was the census has actually revealed a lot of very interesting data.
Yes. Yesterday there was an article in the LA Times.
Right. I mean, since we live in California, we're thinking of that, but I know this is true in many other states as well, that they'll find from the census. But the interesting thing to me was that they said that about 23% of the families in California were living in what we used to call a nuclear family situation.
Mother, father, children.
Mother, father, children. And that Orange County, which is one of our more conservative counties, for those of you outside the state, they were much more traditional.
Because
they had 26% of their families.
Which is not that high compared to
23% in the whole state. 26% were nuclear families in Orange County. So it's kind of like that 3% difference to me doesn't make them so much more traditional.
Most of it was because of Vietnamese,
right,
Mexicans, and other Latinos, other Asian groups, Indians from India. So it wasn't really the quote,
No,
quote,
but
yeah,
they could live in nuclear families, but that's
correct,
not the tradition.
correct.
Tradition
Yeah,
is much more
exactly.
expansive,
Yeah.
just the way it was when I was a kid,
Mm-hmm,
because
mm-hmm.
my mother was the first one born in the United States from her family. But so it was very natural.
Correct,
Her sisters
correct,
were going to move in
correct,
with us when they needed a place to live. My dad's
correct.
mother lived with us. It
Yeah,
was, and it's also a class thing too,
yeah,
I think.
yeah. I think it's also like, in the end, kids are served much better when they have an extended family. There is, I mean, to put an entire responsibility on two people to raise two human beings who are very, very complex. I think that to me, radical or not, it really is a formula for breakdowns.
Well, but in our community, we haven't always had that choice with our blood families.
Correct.
Because often, as you know, they don't necessarily approve of our relationship.
Still don't.
And we always think it's very, very lucky if they do. You talk to someone and it's like, your parents came to your wedding.
Yeah, I know.
It's so wonderful.
It's the exception to the rule.
But we've always sort of been part of chosen families.
Yeah.
It was a privilege.
We're tribes. We have that tribe mentality. We still, remember that one of our roles, especially in indigenous communities throughout the Americas, we were the shamans, the two-spirited people. We this whole thing of just having a husband and wife and two kids, and it was more of a communal thing. And we really also talk about being an ambassador. We translated the spiritual world to the I guess three-dimensional concrete material world, I guess you can call it. So we always had an expansive notion of things.
Well, we were always outsiders too. I mean, in a way, it was not really a chosen rule.
Correct.
It was sort of like, well, since you're gonna give me lemons, I'm gonna make some lemonade here. And
correct.
As an outsider, I'll be a revolutionary. I'll be a mystic. I'll be a spiritual person. I'll be, George Firth wrote the whole musical company about that, about a gay man who is the best friend to a set of couples and the third wheel, as it were. Was a very sort of interesting approach because it gives us a power as outliers, I think.
Well, it was kind of a different story here in the Americas. There was more of a heterogeneous treatment of the third sex, or however they were defined, and a lot of this has one of the first things that the Europeans did when they came to the U.S. It was the most threatening thing for them to see anything queer. And it was the first things that they destroyed. And by destroying that, they literally destroyed the soul of the tribes. That was kind of like the anchor. And you still see, like in Mexico, like there is this place called Juchitán in Oaxaca, Mexico, very matriarchal, a lot of openly gay people, many of them transgenders. It's got some of this westernized kind of aspect to it, so there's that whole notion in there. But it's you can see traces of this, that just groupings that refuse to be totally absorbed, even after 500 plus years. So I think it's important to recognize that in some ways, I mean, this land itself, where we're sitting now, there were probably a lot of queer people here that were here. And in some ways, it's no accident that LA is one of the epicenters of the LGBT movement, because this land is kind of like clamoring for queer justice.
Well, and in addition, any authoritarian body, when you talk about the Europeans coming and what they did to indigenous people here, any authoritarian body doesn't want variation.
Correct.
They want purity, they want adherence, they want, fascism really means a bundle of sticks cut in the same, length.
They want a norm that it can be controlled.
Right, and so even today, the right wing uses us as a kind of foil for them. But it makes a lot of sense,
because as soon as
you deviate from the norm, it's a threat to authoritarian anything.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I like being a
That's
threat.
good
Do you?
news.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good news.
So what do you have planned for us in the future here? I know you just started.
You mean in terms of Equality California?
Well, Equality California or the...
I think we have a lot of challenges ahead of us. I think that trying to figure out our own priorities, our own issues, and how we're going to go about it. We have the, how Prop 8 is an open wound in our community. Many people were disillusioned by the fact that we lost that at the ballot. There is the court, the lawsuit going on, and that hopefully will have success on that front. So there's a little bit of an indecision as to what to do in many ways, and I think it's going to be very tough to test things out and to look at how do we approach that particular issue. But also, I think it could be an exciting conversation that, depending on how many levels we talk about it, can really help us to provide some new light as to where we should take the movement.
Do you think states can really help because really until there's sort of a national recognition and a national law for everybody, states are doing this kind of one at a time, and they're doing so many different kinds of things.
As we speak, we might walk out of this
and see that they got that one vote, right?
Exactly.
But still, do you think it's important for states to do their thing? Because it doesn't really, does it impact?
Well, I think that we have to fight it at both fronts. I think that we have to fight it at a national level and at a state level, because we don't know which one is really going to be, in the end, the winning formula. I also think that the more states do it, the more of a critical mass and a momentum that we build. So I don't think that these are necessarily wasted efforts by any stretch of the imagination. I think that we might want to do a better job at connecting things and supporting each other's movements, kind of thing. But overall, I think that we should fight it in every single front that we can fight it on.
So what's the most important thing to you to see in this state or in this country, either for our community or not?
In terms of activism?
Well, it's an open-ended question. I'm just kind of trying to see, because I know that we've heard the whole sort of line of your life, and it's really a social justice line. And it's unfinished work, not just in the LGBT movement. What would you like to see in the next, say, 10 years happen in this state and this country?
I would like us to see how powerful we are as LGBT people, and how amazingly powerful we are to really claim everything that we have by heritage, the diversity that we have, but everything that we have by what we have done. This is one of the most exciting civil rights movements because it encompasses so many different people from so many walks of life. Clearly we owe a lot to the feminist movement, to the Black liberation movement, but we're also acknowledging that and taking it in different ways. And I think that once we acknowledge our individual and community power, and keep the eye on the prize, I would like to see equality be not only an external concept, but an internal concept. That it really is the principle that drives our movement, that we will want to break down all our internal barriers, so we can speak with one voice, which is, that symmetry, that consistency, which I think will be incredibly powerful.
Well, it's interesting, the word integrity really comes from wholeness. In the integer,
Exactly.
Integrated.
Exactly. Integrated.
Yeah. And that's been hard for LGBT people, because a lot of times, especially being in the closet, you would be everybody that you were, except for that person, which limited everything you were doing. I mean, so many people I know, when they come out, they're very frightened. But they universally say that they feel so much freer, they can be who they are. But this job must be hard on your personal life too. I mean, you have to go up to Sacramento. Do you have to live up there?
No, I will be based in Los Angeles, but I will be traveling throughout the state, which I've been rather provincial up to this point. I'm very LA based. I love the weather here. I love the people, and try to avoid the traffic. But I'm really excited about the prospects of meeting new people, but also the prospects of creating new ideas, finding new synergies, this is going to be, for me personally, I think it's going to be very rewarding. Also, very trying. As optimistic as I am, I think that there will be tremendous challenges, and I'm walking into a situation where our movement is not as connected, as united, and there's a lot of fragmentation. But I'm very excited by the possibilities of what we can all bring together. And like I said, if we have equality as an internal principle and start removing those barriers, I mean, there are layers on layers of this empowerment that we had to get rid of. And as we do that in a very conscious and a very intentional way, we're going to be a movement to be reckoned with. The right wing will have nothing on us.
So if there's one thing you could tell our viewers in the last couple of minutes that you would like them to do,
Yes. Yeah.
Or two things,
Well,
what would it be?
I certainly would like to ask for their support. Equality California is going to need your viewers' support. I would like them to reflect a little bit on some of the things that you and I talked about in terms of, how do we make equality a concept that lives in our personal lives, in our community lives, in addition to wanting it to live outside of our communities as well, to really do a deep reflection on, just the symmetry and the integrity that comes with that. And just get involved. We cannot outsource our liberation. We cannot outsource our freedom, and we cannot outsource our dignity.
Roland, thank you so much.
Thank
it's a
you.
Perfect closing. I'm really, really glad that you will be at Equality California. We all wish you the best, and hopefully people will get the message and know how important it is to support.
Thank you, Sheila.
I'm really glad that you were with us for the hour. And remember,
you've always been such a champion.
Oh, well.
You have
thank you,
such
Roland.
tremendous respect, and you're one of my to call people. I have you on speed dial, so I know
just
that,
to be your friend is enough right now. It's really good because you're going places, man.
I hope so.
Anyway, thank you for being with us. And as Roland said, equality is a concept that's within as well as without. So get used to it.